Hello, everyone. This is Sophia Smallstorm. David and I are going to discuss today sort of a joint theory. It originated from a brainstorm that I had that I discussed with him quite a while back, and he has now added to it. And what he has added to it is extremely interesting, a real stroke of genius. And David absolutely has strokes of genius quite often. David, hi.
Hi, Sophia.
We did mention this, or I mentioned it, in the larger, bigger discussion we had with Jaron and the Sage of Quay, Mike Williams. But the part that you're bringing to it today, you didn't have at that time, and it just came to you, and it's really startling. It's pretty amazing. I think everybody's going to be very jazzed by this.
So again, I do a lot of research, and one of the researchers that I'm very interested in is a guy by the name of Devin Magdy, and he talks about Agartha at the North Pole and all sorts of. There's a lot of mystery surrounding the North Pole. So when we were discussing a long time ago the idea that all life started at the North Pole and the sun was born or was created at the North Pole. So I came up with the idea that the sun was at the North Pole, it melted out its thermal pocket, and that's where people lived. And then the sun started making circles wider, oscillating outwards and inwards. And each time it goes outwards a little farther, it comes a little less to the center. So the inner smaller circle is getting bigger over time, and the outer larger circle is getting bigger over time.
So let me jump in here. There are mythologies and oral histories that all concur that life started at the North Pole. Bach Saga is one of those. And at that time, there was sun and warmth and lots of fertility there in terms of things growing from the soil. And you and I, when we talked a long time ago, I had suggested that maybe the Ice Age was simply the sun moving out, and melting more and more of the ice. The world at that time was much smaller, and the sun somehow was given a directive or had a mind of its own and went skedaddling outward in its orbiting, its circles over the melted ice, which was the world at that time. As small as it was, that was the world that people knew, and that was the North Pole. And so then as it went outward and made bigger and bigger circles and melted more and more ice, maybe its return trajectory was shorter, as you suggest, but at any rate it left the center, what we call conventionally the North Pole, and started doing more work on the edges, and that created the Ice Age in the part where it had left behind.
So, the way I see it was that all of North America and everything outward from there was in an ice age. So the sun left the North Pole by making bigger and bigger circles. It melted out, America and, everything at equal latitudes around South America. And as it goes out farther and farther to the point where it is today, where its outermost large circle is the Tropic of Capricorn, leaving the shore of Antarctica frozen, and then it comes into the Tropic of Cancer, leaving some of the North Pole frozen. So over time, I believe that the sun will go wider and wider, and so the North Pole, the Arctic region, will expand outward. So one day in the future, North America might never melt after the winter. At that point, people are going to migrate southward. If all of North America, if California and Connecticut and everywhere where we are is frozen, we're moving down. We're moving outward. So the population will follow the sun outward.
Yeah, and if I can jump in again, this is supported by the material that I presented in that other discussion about how most of the world's population lives on either side of the equatorial belt, because that's where the sun passes twice every year, and the sun, it reaches the Tropic of Cancer once, and that would be June 21st, and then it has to take another whole year to get back there, and it reaches the Tropic of Capricorn once, which is December 21st, and then it's not until a year later that it goes back there. So in between, it's passed over that middle belt 2 times, and that's where most of humanity resides, because that's how much we need the sun. We like for the sun to pass over us twice, not just to come visit us once.
So with that said, as it's expanding outwards, populations are migrating with it. So again, over time, now the Arctic will have expanded maybe all the way outwards to Mexico. Everything north of Mexico would be frozen. At that point, the terrain there would be like the Antarctic is today, would be almost impassable by most. So you have this expanding ring where all the population is, and then when that ring gets far enough away from the center, a new sun is born in the North Pole under Polaris, and whatever remaining people are suffering in the Arctic northern area can now go to the North Pole to restart another cycle of civilization. But the people in the outer ring won't even be aware of it, and the people in the northern ring are completely isolated from that outer ring. You could pretty much assume that the people in the north probably will have to restart over again. They won't have much knowledge or technology that they've taken with them. But assuming the people that had migrated south didn't blow each other up and continue to advance their mind, body, soul, and intellect, they might have the ability to travel across that frozen ring that separates them from the new inner, center Earth, and be able to come visit. Now, those would be the extraterrestrials, the people from the extra territory that's outside of the frozen ring that the new people are in. Does that make sense? Did I explain that correct?
Yeah, let me do a little recap the way I heard it. So, as the sun keeps moving outward, melting more with the ambition, if you want to give the sun a mind of its own, to melt more, the human population has to go with it because we depend on the sun. So at one time the sun was at the North Pole, the Arctic as it's called, and now it's not so much there anymore. It's left that behind, and it hasn't gotten over what we call Antarctica. That is frozen. That's an ice shelf or an ice wall. But if it's indeed moving out, then eventually the northern parts, what we conventionally refer to as the northern hemisphere, that which lies near the Tropic of Cancer, that's going to be frozen over. That's going to be an effective ice age again. And the people will have moved with it. But at some point you're saying, as the sun leaves frozen areas in its wake behind it, because it's not spending time back there anymore, a new sun will eventually pop out of the North Pole, and it will melt what is frozen, and it will give birth to another whole cycle of life underneath it. And in the meantime, the other former cycle will have moved outward and will have changed in some way, perhaps blown itself up as you suggest, but will not have any knowledge that behind it there's a whole new evolution forming, right?
Correct. If you believe in the story of Admiral Byrd, I know there's a lot of controversy about him, but he said when he flew over the continent, the Antarctic cap of the world, he said past Antarctica, there was a whole nother continent as big as America. And if you look at the map, which I'll put inside this video, you can see that there's other continents in this outer ring. This is just one possibility. We're not sure where this map came from, but it shows a very good possibility of what's out there. And if what he was saying was accurate, this is a good depiction explaining it. Otherwise, if he said there's another continent past Antarctica, that would put it in the Indian Ocean. And so either there's an unknown continent in the Indian Ocean that nobody has ever seen, or we don't live on a globe, which most people that are listening to this already realize.
Right, and we who exist here in this containment of melted area and land, we don't even dream that ahead of us, in front of us, past Antarctica, is a whole new world. New, it's actually old. It was here before us.
Correct. And as long as they didn't destroy themselves, they are more advanced than we are. They have other technologies that we do not have. So, the story of the Atlanteans and all of these civilizations that just picked up and disappeared and nobody knows where they went, perhaps they just moved outwards.
That's amazing, David. When you said that yesterday, I got chills. That could be exactly what the situation was. That these civilizations have just packed up, kept going with the sun, and now they're on the other side of this ice shelf.
And they either know, the cycle, they figured it out, or they're completely unaware that there is a new habitable area back at the center again as they move their way outwards. All of these, researchers that talk about, aliens and other planets and truly believe the nonsense of that, what they don't realize is it makes a lot more sense if you look at this model. If there are other beings visiting us, they're coming from the same plane. They don't have to endure space. They don't have to endure different atmospheric conditions. They don't have to figure any of that out. They're just coming from thousands of miles away instead of billions.
Right. And David, I was thinking that each sun that is born out of the North Pole, talk about the star also, but each sun that is born could have some difference from the one that preceded it. So the life forms that it generates and feeds might be slightly different from the ones that have preceded them, that are now on the other side of the wall.
We are all in tune to the energy of the sun. So if it had a different energy, a different frequency, we would be different people.
That's right. We would be different in our biological nature. I'm assuming that it could be still called biology. But yeah, this was a stroke of genius, David. You are a world explorer in your own mind.
So I want to bring up another thing. The story of Jesus and many other religious figures have the exact same story. They were born on the same day. They died and they were reborn 3 days later, which is the story of the sun hitting the solstice and then coming back. Jesus walked on water. Well, if you go down to the ocean and watch the sunset, the sun walks on the water right to your feet. And if you, Sophia, are standing, 100 yards or a mile down the beach, the sun walks on water right to you. So there is your personal relationship with the sun, the S-O-N, the S-U-N. There's so many things that they say about Jesus. Jesus was the light of the world, the giver of life. There's so many things that you can relate to the sun. And then when I was talking with Jaron, he's the one that pointed out to me that the new sun is born in the north. And the problem I had with the story of the three wise men, they followed the star to the sun. But it didn't make sense to me because all of the stars except one move, and that's Polaris. So the sun is born in the north underneath the North Star. So perhaps the story of the wise men is the story of men going to the north for their savior from the cold. They're living in a rough environment. It must be really tough. Then all of a sudden the sun is born and feeds them and creates a loving world for them to live in rather than a harsh, cold environment. For all of the religious people out there, I'm not saying that Jesus didn't walk the earth or any of the other religious figures that have the exact same story as Jesus. Perhaps, Jesus was here and his soul is the sun. I believe that we are all having physical experiences here and that our soul, for lack of a better word, our consciousness, our immortal being is up in the stars. Perhaps the stars are the projector of us, and the sun, the S-U-N, is the projector of the S-O-N. I haven't been, a religious person in any way, shape, or form until I discovered the true nature of our world and that it was created intelligently. But it's just something to think about on how, all of these different religions could be tied to the sun in the sky, the SUN. That's it. I'm just trying to think these things out.
Of course. No, that's fun. That's what's fun about this. And then people give a little part of what they're thinking, and it causes a brainstorm in someone else, and they trade that back to the first person, and then more and more it's fleshed out. And these are all theories, because nobody has written this history down. You know the Beatles song, Here Comes the Sun? Isn't there something about it seems like ice is slow? Oh, it seems like years since it's been here, and then ice is slowly melting. Maybe they knew something we didn't know.
Maybe. The ice ages don't come forward and retreat. They all march outwards. I wonder if there's any evidence of that. If my theory is correct, ice ages march out from the center. They start in the center, and then it melts out from the center and advances on the outside. So. Yeah.
I mean, what's at the North Pole isn't an ice age anymore, but there is supposedly another one that's going to follow, right?
Supposedly. We'll see. With all the manipulation of the weather, maybe what they're doing in the sky, they're trying to stop the next cycle from happening. Who knows? There's so many ways to look at that.
That's actually a good point, because if they're creating this artificial warming by putting the saran wrap of white haze over the melted part of the Earth, then they are trying to contain the effect of what the sun will do if it keeps moving out. Now, we are told that the ice shelf in Antarctica is like a bunch of ice cubes, that it's melting. And if that's true, then it's testament to your theory that the sun is incrementally moving more and more out. It's not global warming that's causing the warming of the oceans, of the Antarctic Ocean, and the melting of the ice down there. It's because the sun is creeping farther and farther out. The Tropic of Capricorn is no longer its last boundary. So this is very possible that they're offsetting what it's leaving behind, which is incremental cold, and they're trying to heat that up. I mean, 2016 was the hottest year on record, and they did that artificially.
One last thing I want to put into this conversation, and I touched on it earlier, is perhaps the people that are living in the outer ring do have a rule that they're not allowed to come here and interfere. Maybe some of them don't know, or maybe just some of them have come here, planted themselves down, and taken control. You know, the real puppet masters of these world governments, they could be from the outer ring. They could be a rogue group. They could be people that think that they need to guide us or control us for whatever reason. But that is, in my mind, a good explanation of how the powers that be got there.
And David, it could also be that the people on the other side, the side of Antarctica that have preceded us, that they have had to sign some kind of treaty that doesn't allow them to cross the wall, the ordinary folk. Just the way we're not allowed to go over Antarctica ourselves, and don't we have some limitations on the North Pole? We're not allowed to fly over the North Pole. You didn't mention that, but I think you said to me that pilots aren't allowed to fly directly over the North Pole because what? They might see something? They might see the opening where the sun comes from.
Well, the conspiracy realists, that's what they say, that you might see something they're not supposed to see, but the official story is that the magnetic energy coming out of the North Pole will disable the controls on the airplane and it's too dangerous. I don't buy that, but I can't prove it wrong. If somebody flew over the North Pole and could film it, that would answer it, but we haven't seen that.
We have to send a polar bear with a dog tag to the area and have him report back, see if anything happens to him.
You know, there's many reports in some books about the North Pole where explorers went there and it melted and it got warm, and that makes no sense on the heliocentric model that we have. Perhaps there is an inner sun in, you know, what they call Agartha or Shambhala. I'm not sure, you know, there's different names for it. And it already is warming, getting ready to surface and come out and start the next cycle of civilization.
And this could explain, David, why the polar bears don't have, I mean, isn't it something about polar bears dying because they don't have ice to float around on? And it could be not just the global warming, but there's a sun being born underneath.
Perhaps, they'll make their way outwards with the colder temperatures when that happens, if it happens. All fascinating stuff to think about.
Very interesting. Very good theory on your part, and I'm glad that my little Ice Age theory helped. Shake and bake, and I helped.
Well, I give credit to a lot of people. I do research. I take little pieces from here and there, and I think about it, and I try to arrange it in a way that makes sense. So this one hit me the other day, and the map that's on the screen right now makes a lot of sense to me. So there you go.
There you go. Thank you, David. Thank you for sharing that, and I'm glad that we had that long discussion the other day, and we should have more of those.
All right, Sophia. Talk soon.